What? Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Good afternoon.
Sorry, I was having trouble logging on.
Nothing unusual.
Yeah. Although normally I'm automatically logged in. So I don't know what the issue was. But we're all here. So that's good. And starting the screen share, obviously. Okay. Now this should be everyone can see the page now?
Yeah, it's fine.
Good, good, good. So, traditionally, we do not study Torah on Tisha B'Av. It's part of the mourning for the day, except texts that connect to the sadness of the day. So we're going to take a look at a number of Talmudic texts that deal with the destruction of the temples and see what they have to say. I have all kinds of other materials here, but let's start with this. So famous section here in Bavli Yuma and the Tractate of Yuma. Who would like to read? Do we have a volunteer?
I'll read, Rabbi.
Okay, thanks, Ricky.
From this point on, if you want to stick around, you can stick around.
The first
Hello?
temple,
I really wiped out. Well, I'm still wiped out, but I'm less wiped out than I was.
Yehudi, we hear you.
Yeah, mute yourself.
Yeah, I just muted Yehudi.
okay.
Okay.
The first temple, why was it destroyed? Because there were three matters that existed: idol worship, forbidden sexual relations, and bloodshed.
Okay. So three sins that are pretty much like the worst sins in Judaism. Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayot, and Shfichut Damim. And so these are the rabbis obviously writing after the destruction of the second temple, but they're saying, okay, this is what was going on. Go on. There's other material there. I'm not dealing with all the proof texts that they bring in. Just want to get to the main points here. Go ahead.
However, in the time of the second temple, they were engaged in Torah study, observance of mitzvot, and acts of kindness. Why was it destroyed? Because there was causeless hatred. This comes to teach you that causeless hatred is equivalent to the three transgressions: idol worship, forbidden sexual relations, and bloodshed.
Okay, so the Hebrew for causeless hatred is sinat chinam, literally free hatred. And what are they talking about when they talk about causeless hatred? Or what hatred are they talking about?
Well, there was sectarian, not sectarian, there were different groups were fighting for control of the temple at the same time as they were trying to fight against the Romans.
Yeah. So as we know, first century Judaism was not exactly homogeneous. There were many, many different perspectives that were many, many different views of Judaism that were developing. At the same time, you had very different political approaches. So there was a great deal of internecine fighting among the Jewish community. Yehudi?
I don't think this expression is a rabbinic expression. This is a biblical expression, sinach chinam. It's mentioned in Psalm 35. It's mentioned in Psalm 109. It's mentioned in slightly different grammatical constructions, like, for example, sonai chinam. What it really means is a person says that people are acting against me, or, rejecting me, or, doing things to harm me, and I have not done anything to bring it about. Or let's rephrase that. In my eyes, I have done nothing to bring it about. I think the second is better than the first. In other words, the term is used in, this is one version of the story. And so Sefer Melachot at the end, there's a different version. It doesn't say Sinach Kilam. It says Sinach Israel. People were just basically, they all hated each other. Now, I think you have to understand what that really means. It means people were envious of each other. People would basically cause other people, I really think that the way, if you get up on the internet right now, type up the English Sinach or the Hebrew Sinach, you'll get enough explanations of that term that practically any controversy there is between two people or two different sources of thought becomes Sinach. Originally, it meant people were trying to get me, and I don't believe that I have merit in this. The best example in the whole Tanakh is Job saying that about Hashem. Okay? That Job, the person who's suffering so much, says, there's no reason why I should be suffering so much. He acknowledges the fact that he sinned here and there, but what I'm getting in retribution is way out of proportion to anything I ever did. So I really think we have to be extremely careful with this expression. This expression has become like tikkun olam. Make it whatever you want to make it, Whatever you want to do is tikkun olam. Whatever you don't like is sinach chinam.
Yeah, that's a good point. I did not remember all of those sources in the Tanakh. Although, of course, this still is rabbinic literature, and how they are using it may be different than the way it's being used in the Tanakh. And again, they could be reflecting their own understanding and their own perspectives, that just as, we might be using it willy-nilly today without really thinking about what it means. Still, we have this sense that, for the rabbis, it wasn't necessarily the major sins, but they, I think you're right. I mean, it's a sermon here that they're trying to speak out against sinat chinam as they understand it. Yes, Yehudi? Yehudi, you're muted.
Yochanan ben Tarasa says at the end of Melachot something else. Not just Shesanu Israel, She'ahavu et hamamon Shesanu Israel. They were all chasing after the riches and greed, and they also basically hated each other. I really think that's a far better frame than the way we constantly quote Sinach Chinam. First of all, like I said, Sinach Chinam is a biblical expression. Sanu Israel, that would already be a rabbinic expression attached to greed. That is completely understandable. Everybody wants whatever anybody else has, I mean, it clearly puts money in the center of the deal here. Mm-hmm. And Chinam basically is the opposite of mamon.
Okay. So let's go on to take a look at a few other perspectives from the rabbis and what caused the destruction of the temple And obviously, we'll see that there are a number of issues that the rabbis are clearly concerned about. There are a number of sins that the rabbis clearly want to speak against, and they will connect them with the destruction of the temple. So here we have a selection from Bavli Shabbat, which is a little extensive. Ricky, go on.
Said Abaye, Jerusalem was destroyed only because they violated the Sabbath there, and they have hidden their eyes from my Sabbaths. I am profaned among them.
Yeah, so here we have a very clear verse from Yechezkel, why God was angry. Okay, go on.
Said Rab Abahu, Jerusalem was destroyed only because they stopped reciting the Shema morning and evening. Those who chase liquor from early in the morning until late in the evening are inflamed by wine. And it is written, have lyre and lute, timbrel, flute, and wine, but who never give thought to the plan of Hashem, and take no note of what he is designing. And it is written, assuredly, my people will suffer exile for not giving heed.
Yeah, so they have to draw on a number of verses, but the section Yeshayahu is complaining about God's anger with the people for what they're doing wrong. And the way the rabbis are understanding it, or Rabbi Abba is understanding it, is, they're not reciting Shema. Now, of course, were they reciting Shema in First Temple times? I mean, they likely were. As we've talked about, and it's coming up in this week's Torah portion, the Shema it already stood out as a text. How it was used liturgically, that was a development, but certainly it stood out as a text. So here we have so far two ideas about why Jerusalem is destroyed, or two sins that they see as so terrible. And how would you characterize them? What are the rabbinic concerns in each of these, the position of Rabbi Abahu and of Abaye?
Well, these would be ritual concerns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean that there are concerns that people aren't observing Shabbat, they aren't davening appropriately. So now we may not necessarily put either of these sins in the same character as the top three of Avodah Zarah, Gilui Ariyot, and Shvichut Damim. Or maybe even Sinat Chinam, however we want to understand it. Here we have yet another opinion of Rav Hamnuna. Go ahead, Ricky.
Said Rab Hanuna, Jerusalem was destroyed only because they neglected the education of school children. Pour it on the child in the street. Why pour it? Because the children are in the streets.
In other words, if they were in the streets, they weren't in school.
Correct.
So how would we characterize and you can see in the Hebrew really de'olal bachutz, children in the streets are literally outside. They're not, presumably not in the Beit Midrash where they should be. So how would you characterize this?
Lack of concern for maintenance of the religion for the future.
Yeah, lack of education. Now, well, okay, go on. Yehudi? You're muted.
Not all teaching was going on indoors. There was plenty of teaching going on outdoors. That's trouble. Number two, if you read the pasuk in its original context, it has absolutely nothing to do. What it's saying there is that Yirmiyahu is so full of anger he's going to spill it everywhere. He'll spill it on all our machuts and our implicated here. And in other words, all they're really doing is saying that, why poor? Because the children are in the streets. I think what he really means is they're fooling around in the streets. It's not the fact that they're not maintaining educational institutions. It's what they're doing there, okay? And any city in ancient Near East used lots of children in the streets. Often they'd be doing errands for their parents, shopping, getting food, this, that, and the other thing. Listen, I'll make a very personal story. Once upon a time, I'm driving to my office, and what do I see? My son who's enrolled in Yeshiva Flatbush High School. I can't believe I'm seeing this. He's at the corner of MUJ and Coney Island Avenue playing Space Invaders, which was the big rage at the time, And I said to him later on in the day, I said, where were you at 9 o'clock this morning? And he first tells me he was in school until I told him I saw him. And, what is that? Just not the Hakenu Miyoshpe based on Midrash. Well, those not the Hakenu Miyoshpe Kronot. This is the thing with industries. It's what they were doing there, okay? If they were in the streets basically buying food, buying their Shabbos, it's the point here being that, the implication is that there's stuff going on in the streets you don't want your children involved with. Okay. And if you allow your children, if you don't discipline it, like I could have just made believe I never even saw my son play Space Invaders, right? I could have just let it go and say, okay, he had a boring teacher, he cut class. But no, I didn't do that. I confronted him about it. And I think that's exactly what they're saying here. That's the children were in the streets and nobody did anything about it. That's basically his point.
Yeah. So, by your story also shows that this is a contemporary concern. That, when we think of, why is Jerusalem destroyed? What are the factors that contribute to the destruction, if you will, of a civilization, of a culture? And I would say that, some basic values. They begin with, in this section, with some ritual values, very important ritual values, I would say. But then here they're moving on to much social values. And, I think we can, it's not unusual for us to say when we're concerned we're about Jewish continuity, when that is the buzzword, we're concerned about Jewish identity, that all of these things still play a part in our concern about what direction Judaism is going. And I would argue that, it's true in many countries. America could be concerned about what direction it's going, where are its values, how does it stay true to its original values, that some of these things are very much still contemporary concerns. So on one hand, the rabbis are talking about, how could Jerusalem be destroyed? But, they're talking about all the factors that, the values that they see as important. Here we have some more. Sorry, Yehudi, go ahead.
I just also thought, when we say, oh, wow, of course, the usual translation is children, but, children is relative. I think sometimes with all the Jewish kids in street demonstrations, nobody hears me? All the Jewish kids out in the middle of street demonstrations for causes and for things that have actually nothing to do with what the Jewish home should really be about. But you lose control of your children. Your children are basically out there doing whatever they please and getting involved with people and groups and gangs and all kinds of other types of causes that are highly questionable and are not furthering the survival of the Jewish people.
Yeah.
But we're talking about why did the Jewish people's home get destroyed? Well, it got destroyed because when we let our children get involved in doing things that were not going to do anything for the future of the Jewish people.
Yeah, as the story that I always tell is Moshe Waldach's a well-known, probably better known for his humor, but he eventually became a rabbi. And he tells the story of when he's meeting with this before he became a rabbi, but he was meeting with a group of Jewish parents, around the Hebrew school, and he asked them, "How many of you want your children to become professional athletes?" And like nobody raised their hand, and he said, "How many of you would like your kids to be involved, committed Jews?" And all of the parents raised their hands. He said, "Okay, so then why are your kids not in shul on Shabbos or in Hebrew school, but they're playing hockey or soccer?" We sometimes, I mean, not that there's anything wrong with our kids playing sports, but the point is, where do we put all of the emphasis? Where do we what are the values that we really are with which we are raising our children, and what do we allow them to get involved with? Okay, here are a few more answers. You can keep going, Ricky, because these are all short.
Ricky, you're muted.
Sorry, you're still muted.
Still muted.
There you go.
I didn't mute it. Said Ula, Jerusalem was ruined only because they were not ashamed on account of one another. They have done abhorrent things, yet they do not feel shame and they cannot be made to blush.
So what is their concern here? What's going on in society?
Lack of morality?
Lack of
Morality.
morality. Or the sense that there should be some standards that, and it's not everyone is necessarily behaving poorly, but the fact that there are people who are behaving poorly and no one is embarrassed by it. No one calls them out. No one speaks and complains about something like this.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
again, it seems like, blaming the victim. I mean, does any of these people or comments just say, well, the Romans were strong, the Babylonians were strong, and they had the power? And would it have been natural? Should they have said, oh, we'll just leave the Jews alone? I mean, they obviously conquered, many peoples. And are we supposed to believe that we'll survive all of this just because we're God's people? There's something.
Can I take a shot at that,
Carol,
Rabbi?
you're missing
Sure.
the ancient mind.
Oh, okay, Danny, and then
Mind, one's deity protects, if one's deity is strong, he protects the people.
There's something else, which is we all know that the more stronger power can destroy the weaker power. What we're saying here, I think, is, the Romans could have occupied Jerusalem without destroying it and burning down the temple. That wasn't something that the Romans went around doing everywhere they occupied some city. Most of the time, it was their interest to keep the buildings up and the operation going. After all, they wanted taxes. How are they going to get taxes from a destroyed city? The real reason why the Romans destroyed Jerusalem was because we rebelled against them, and we basically started a whole thing where it was a rebellion which was more a fight between ourselves than a fight against the Romans. Now, that type of rebellion is never going to succeed. And what I think these series of questions is, how do we get to the point where we were so lost sight of what was important that we basically were more, even though on paper we were rebelling against the Romans, we were actually more interested in fighting each other than we were fighting against the Romans. And I hope that answers your question, Carol, because that's what this is really about. It's not that they didn't think for a minute that they could have beaten the Romans on the open field or anything like that.
yeah, again, I think that we also have to understand that within the context, they are speaking sermonically as opposed to historically. That they are trying to emphasize what should be the values of our culture. What should be the, just put it bluntly, what are the values of Judaism? And how do we survive if we do not live according to our values? Which, they understood what was happening, and that the Romans were the Romans, and the Romans destroyed Jerusalem. On the other, or for that matter, the Babylonians. But really, what undermines a culture, what undermines Judaism, is when we don't live according to our values. To some extent, why do we have these three big sins? That Yehareg v'al ya'avor, one should be killed rather than transgress them. That's what the Avodah Zarah, the Shefichut Damim, and the Gilui Arayot, those sins. I mean, they're so terrible that they really undermine all of Jewish values. And how they're characterized, and that's a whole nother discussion. But the fact is that if you stop believing in and living those values, then basically you're destroyed. So, we have to put this, it's not a historical discussion. It's really a sermonic discussion. It's a discussion about values.
Could I add one thing to this?
Absolutely.
I think a great number of these things, again, I'm addressing Carol specifically, are lack of social cohesion. If you take a look and take the whole list of them, that's pretty much what they're amounting to. It's not that with social cohesion we could have beaten the Romans in the open field, but we would have had more sense than to basically go to war against them and rebel against them without basically even having a set of common goals. So we were more interested in using whatever this particular revolt was coming from to fight each other rather than to fight the Romans. How do we have social cohesion? Number one, we never would have had the revolt in the first place. Josephus was dead set against it and trying to convince people not to do it, okay? But we also would have basically had enough sense to stop it before it got completely out of hand, like our real Zakkai ended up trying to do, like Rabbi Poppy already pointed out. In other words, you really have to get straight what the point of all this is. It's not that anybody had a slightest idea that the Jews could have beaten the Romans. Of course they didn't think that. What they do think is they could have had a great deal more social cohesion with each other. Under those circumstances, whatever would have happened under the Romans would have been a lot more bearable and would not have ended up the way that it did.
And again, it's a different discussion. I'm really not interested in the politics, but much of the worry in Israel, you hear many, many, many comments that, it's not about right or left. People are deeply worried about the social cohesion in Israel and how they treat one another. And that is far more serious than, a given law, a given party's position. And, I would say that there's an element of that in the United States as well. We're concerned that people can't talk to each other, whether they're from different races, they're from different political parties, they're, from different nationalities, different religions, that there's some, basic underlying values that do not allow, that, aren't being observed and don't allow people to communicate. So we get some more here. Go on.
Excuse me. Said Rabbi Isaac, Jerusalem was destroyed only because they treated equally the small and the great. And it shall be, like people, like priests, and then the earth shall be utterly emptied.
Yeah, so we're now ignoring the verses. What's so terrible that Shushvu Katan v'Gadol, that they're treating equally the small and the great?
Sounds right.
Yeah, I mean,
It should
in
be
many ways
judged.
that's. So, but what's their issue?
Well, because if you treat equally the small and the great, so any opinion goes. So a person like, for example, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. can run for president on a platform that vaccines don't work or some other complete nonsense, and actually get, I think he now is polling something like 20% of the vote in the Democratic Party. In other words, the point was that basically people had no respect for their elders, okay, and they had no respect for wisdom that had taken generations to accumulate. You know, every society has a problem that young people think they know a lot better than people who lived 3 times as long as they have. But most societies find a way to deal with that problem. Here, it's being implied that they did not deal with that problem successfully.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we often hear as well in our society about the lack of respect for positions of authority, whatever that is. And, we've recognized that sometimes, our leaders have to be held accountable. People in positions of authority have to behave a certain way, but also, it's very hard to function when there's no basic respect. On one hand, there can be something very, very positive about getting a second opinion. On the other hand, when there's a basic distrust of doctors, that creates a problem for the medical profession and for people's health. Okay, here we have one more.
Said Rabbi Amram ben Rabbi Shimon bar Abba, and Rabbi Shimon bar Abba said Rav Chanina. Jerusalem was destroyed only because they did not correct one another. For leaders were like stags that found no pasture.
Yeah, they're obviously reading, and that's from what we read last night. So again, what is their concern here? What's so terrible?
So when people go in the wrong direction, and especially the implication is the leaders go in the wrong direction, it's important for the congregation. That's the congregation is really right. The people as a whole to get up and say something about it. Look, isn't that's exactly what's happening in Israel right now? Now I don't. Let's just say it. I don't necessarily agree with what the people are doing right now. It doesn't have anything to do with it. What I'm simply saying is, it's very, in a way, it's sort of also healthy for Israel because it shows that, the people are prepared to get up and express themselves and tell the leaders, we don't agree with what you're doing. Okay, that in itself is a healthy, vibrant side of democracy. Look, in the whole world, how many countries can something like that even happen? We have 193 members of the UN, and I don't think there's even 50. Something could happen in them, like what's happening right now in Israel. That the people on the streets are getting up and saying to the leadership, what you're doing isn't right, and nothing happens to them. Okay? They're perfectly free to do it and say it whatever they want to say. And they should do it too. It's not like if they didn't do it, they'd be irresponsible. If you feel like they're taking you in the wrong direction, you have to speak up.
Yeah. So yeah. Again, all of these things are, we can't.
Leviticus 19, Hocheach Tocheach et Amitecha.
That is.
It is interesting that they're talking Sarah. So I think we have to realize that, we all know you're supposed to tell your fellow people. But I have a funny feeling it's this midrash, even though it says the pasuk they bring in some way subverts the words they say. They say Shaloho Chichu Zeh, but the proof is Hayu Sarah. So it somehow says the proof tells me more than what they said before the proof. It tells me they're really talking about the leaders and not just about ordinary people.
And here, they give a little explanation here of what they mean. Go ahead, Ricky.
Just as the hart's head is at the side of the other's tail, so Israel of that generation hid their faces in the earth and didn't correct one another.
Yeah, that's so, some harsh words about not standing up and saying what should be done. Okay, here we
Which I think applies in all directions.
mhm. Yeah,
But I
that's true.
think the
Yeah,
real
it goes
allusion-
both
Both to
ways.
leaders and to the Amcha.
Yeah,
But
yeah, I would
I
say
think
so.
the allusion here is the story about Kamsa Bar Kamsa, because that's where they use the exact phrase. Kav Shupanei Hamakaka. It's
Uh-huh.
exactly in that story where Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, one gets invited by mistake and gets thrown out of the house. And then the actual text of the story in Bali Gittin says, "But Kav Shupanei Hamakaka." But I can't help but feel that this is the reverse of what was said before. People do have to get after the leadership, but the leadership is going in the wrong direction. But on the other hand, the leadership has to lead. Okay,
Yeah,
they can't become Shupanei Makarka.
absolutely. It's you're all correct. It's got to work both ways. And turn back to Vayikra.
Right. Don't do it in a way which is sinful. Right.
Right. Mhm. Okay. And here we have yet another one. Ricky can go on.
Said Rav Judah, Jerusalem was destroyed only because they humiliated disciples of sages there. But they mocked the messengers of God and despised his words and scoffed at his prophets until the wrath of the Lord arose against the people till there was no remedy.
And keep going.
What is the meaning of till there was no remedy? Said Rav Judah. Said Rav, whoever humiliates a disciple of a sage will have no remedy for his injury.
Okay, so here we have the sages having a rather exalted understanding of who they are. They're like a messenger of God, which, to some extent is not necessarily incorrect. And so they're going to be very harsh about, the punishment. But here too, a lack of respect for someone's learning and knowledge, which one could argue sometimes happens in this world today. So as we read through this list, we suddenly realize, this isn't just in the ancient world. What our rabbis learn from the destruction of the temple, yes, they know the historical background. They know the Babylonians had the power, the Romans had the power, and nothing was necessarily going to change that. However, they're taking it to another level, to a spiritual level. How do we maintain ourselves? How do we survive as a people by living our values and observing our values and our values that are very comprehensive? They could be in ritual, they could be social interaction, they could be in maintenance of the state, the community, whatever. It's leadership, it's individuals, a very, very rich section here. And let's go on.
And said Rabbah, Jerusalem was destroyed only because people of integrity there ceased. As it is said, roam the streets of Jerusalem, search its squares, look about and take notes. Note, you will not find a man, there is none who acts justly, who seeks integrity, that I shall pardon him.
So another one, there's a sense of a lack of integrity.
That's really very good. It sums up the entire list.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I've been writing back and forth, communicating with some of my friends who are Israeli, in Israel, out of Israel, whatever, and I was talking, I mean, I just mentioned my personal experience that I was deeply uncomfortable with the soldiers who are refusing to do or threatening not to report for reserve duty, and the number of officers and soldiers that are retiring or have decided to leave the service. And I said, I'm really uncomfortable with that, because after all, the army is in service of the people, of the nation, not just the government. This is something that affects all of the people. And as one of them responded to me, and he's someone who serves, so he speaks with a certain degree of authority that I don't have. And he said, yeah, well, what if you don't have any integrity? What if you feel the government has no integrity, and you don't trust them? They're the ones who are giving you the orders, but can you trust them to give the right kind of orders? I actually heard an interview on Israeli news with the pilot. He said, you're somewhat removed from the conflict. You're just going to very cleanly press a button to fire a missile or drop a bomb. But, you want to know that the people giving you that order have an awareness of what's happening on the ground, that are going to be sensitive to that horrible term that we use, collateral damage, but innocent bystanders. And as a couple of people who are normally further to the right than I am, they said, when you got someone like Ben-Gvir or Smotrich controlling police and soldiers, people didn't even serve in the army. So it's a different perspective.
Neither did Bill Clinton, Rabbi Fauci.
Pardon me?
Neither did Bill Clinton. Let's keep that in mind. Once upon a time, no one could get elected president of the United States unless they had first done some kind of active duty service in some branch of the armed forces.
Right.
The last person who fulfilled that criteria was President George H.W. Bush. But every one of the presidents from the Second World War till his time had. Now Bill Clinton gets elected. And I think, yeah, you're right. When he first got elected, the people in the military had a hell of a problem with taking orders from him. That's why a lot of the first operations he made were total fiascos, like the one in Somalia. Who's this guy who's now has no idea what it is to even served in the armed forces, now suddenly giving orders and telling us where we should put men in danger of losing their lives? I think the argument has something to say, but when all said and done, civilians make the decisions.
Yeah.
I don't think Abraham Lincoln ever served military duty either. So that's a totally specious argument.
Right. But, I think that it's, the sense that people don't believe that their government, the people making the decisions, have any integrity, whether they're right or wrong. I mean, that's a very, very
It's not
serious
their
concern.
integrity, it's their politics. These people do have integrity. It's their politics that bombs violence. There's no issue with their integrity. That's not being honest. If they think these people are political extremists, which, look, everybody's entitled to label somebody else a political extremist. It's just a question of what end of the spectrum you happen to be on. But once they're the elected officials of a country in a democracy, then you no longer have the power to say, you send up 25 pilots to a target, and each one's going to decide whether the person giving the orders is a person of integrity. Just imagine how the army's going to function under such circumstances.
Yeah. Okay. So that was, this was actually from a whole set of questions I got from one of my teachers, Rabbi Daniel Goldfarb. And, his questions are And do you think the rabbis intended this literally? Would you say that our society, Jewish community today, has false sins that threaten its existence? So let's, as we talked about. Now here, let's take a look at a couple of other texts that last night, the introduction to the reading of Megillat Echa, we had the comments of Rabbi J.J. Schachter, who said that it's really not about the destruction of the temple, the keynote, but it's really about the breakdown in the relationship between God and Israel. And here are some Talmudic comments regarding that. Would someone else like to read? This is for famous sections from Talmud Brachot.
I'll read.
Okay, thanks, Carol.
Rabbi Elazar also said, since the day the temple was destroyed, the gates of prayer were locked, as it is said, though I plead and call out, he shuts out my prayer. Yet even though the gates of prayer were locked, the gates of tears were not locked, as it is stated, hear my prayer, Lord, and give ear to my pleading. Keep not silence at my tears.
Okay, so what is Rabbi Elazar trying to teach? What is his concern? Why do you think he's saying what he's saying?
This is very interesting, Rabbi, because in Tanakh itself, you know where the first place the word Jima actually shows up? This is Torah season. The first place it ever shows up is where Chizkiyahu prayed after Yisrael told him the illness you have. He's 39 years old at the time. It is fatal. You're not going to survive. And then Chizkiyahu decided, well, if that's what God's prophet tells me, I don't have any choice. I'm going to have to pray direct over his head and pray to the boss, which he does. And before Yisrael even gets home, Hashem says, Ra'iti et zvatecha. And that's the very, very first place you ever see the word for tears. We tend to assume that every time you see the word bechi, what you're talking about is tears, but that's not the case at all. That's a complete misunderstanding. When Yaakov kisses Rachel, he's not crying. He's thrilled. Are you kidding?
Yeah.
This is simply the misunderstanding. It means crying out loud. That's what Becky means. Duma means tears coming out of your eyes. Okay. Now, what he's trying to say is that if you cry to the point where your misery is visible, then Hashem might still, pay attention or do something about what you're crying about. But by no means do I say what I just said is solving the problem of this statement. It's just adding a little background information in my help.
But it's still kind of this stunning statement that, and understandable. I mean, certainly by the time of Rabbi Elazar, after the destruction of the temple, things were not necessarily so great for the Jews in Eretz Yisrael. They were getting worse, as certainly when Rome becomes Christian. That
Rabbi Elazar is around 270. Okay, see, he's a prophecy before Diocletian, but after Mark Antonius. So we're talking about, this is Rabbi Yochanan's student, Rabbi Elazar Rempentah. So we don't have Christianity on the horizon as a rule yet, but there's definitely around. But I don't see how that relates to Sharei Tefillah versus Sharei Dima.
Yeah, okay, but I'm just thinking of the overall sense. The temple has been destroyed. Jewish power is not returning, and the sense like, okay, but we're praying to God. It's not like we've stopped praying, but trying to salvage. And it could also just simply be more a statement of heartfelt prayer. It's one thing to just utter words. It's another thing to really be able to emote and feel it on a very, very deep level. Carol, you wanted to say something?
No, I was just saying that it's not prayer by rote. It's, you
Hmm.
know,
That's what I was
you're really
implying
feeling,
before, but I'm not sure about it.
Yeah.
No, I think that's what this is trying to say, but I'm not certain. I haven't really studied it thoroughly. There's a lot of possibilities.
Yeah. It's an intriguing statement, and another one that follows very shortly afterwards. Go ahead, Carol.
And
Also
Rabbi
from Rabbi
Elazar
Elazar.
said, since the day the temple was destroyed, an iron wall separates Israel from their Father in heaven, as it is said, and take for yourself an iron griddle and set it as an iron wall between yourself and the city. It will be a sign for the house of Israel. Ezekiel 4:3.
Yeah, so taking this verse from Ezekiel and saying that there's an iron wall that separates Israel from their Father in heaven. That's a pretty powerful statement. And I think for Rabbi Elazar, I mean, I think there's a great deal of frustration on how much the Jewish people are suffering. And there's a tremendous feeling of distance from God. You know, it's already used in the Tanakh. It will develop later in the minds of different Jewish thinkers. The idea of God, we've talked about this, the God of causing the divine face to shine upon you, that God is looking at you. You know, we want our parents to notice that we're doing something. You know, we're playing, we're at the pool, we're diving off the board. Look at me, mommy, look at me, look at me, look at me, daddy. You know, we want to be seen. And not just out of ego, but just a sense that someone is looking at us and caring about us. And to feel that when God turns the divine face away, then like we're lost, we're abandoned. And that's a concern among the psalmists, and then later on as well. Who was it? I'm not going to remember who made the quote, but you know, when God's face is turned, Auschwitz is history. You know, that when God's face turns away from the world, it's when all these horrible things. Now, one could, you know, discuss that theology. It's again another discussion, but the
You've
sense
got
of
an interesting book in Richard Elliott Friedman's The Hidden Face of God.
I have that.
yeah. So it's
Where he takes that, if you take a look at that one.
yeah, okay. But the sense of abandonment here. Okay. Now, what were the other sources I wanted to look at? This is just you know, just a reminder that on Tisha B'Av, we connect this to many events, not just the destruction of the temple. So, and you know, in Mishnah Ta'anit, beforehand they discover the different. They present the different things that happen on Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, and here too. Pardon me, no coffee today, so. B'Tisha B'Av nigzar al avotenu shelo yikansu la'aretz, that the decree that our ancestors would not enter into Eretz Yisrael, when they were wandering in the desert, that occurred on Tisha B'Av. V'charav habayit barishona v'shniya, the two temples were destroyed. V'nil kedab Beitar, the last stand of Bar Kokhba. And finally, V'nechresha ha'ir, the city of Jerusalem was plowed over. I mean, part of the result of the Bar Kokhba revolt is that Jews were not allowed in Yerushalayim. And it was turned into a pagan city. And that's also why when we talk about the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, it's really was done in northern Israel, which is where the Jewish community moved to and became much more central. As much as we talk about exile with the first destruction, and certainly many, many left after the destruction of the second temple and people went to Babylonia, there still was very much a Jewish community in Eretz Yisrael. We still have, most of our midrashim are composed in Eretz Yisrael. A great many of our piyutim were composed in Eretz Yisrael. So, but the reality was, even though they were in Israel, they were kept out of Yerushalayim. And we're familiar, Mishenichnas Av Mema'atim B'Simcha, when the month of Av begins, we decrease joy. We're aware of some of the customs of the 3 weeks from Shivasar B'Tammuz until Av, but also in the Tisha Yamim, Shabbat Shachal Tisha B'Av Liot B'Tocha, the week in which the 9th of Av falls. Asor Milasaper U'Milachabes, it's forbidden to cut hair and wash clothes. Although here they say Uvechamisha Mutarim Mipnei Chavot Shabbat. You can on Thursday because of Shabbat, but as the footnote says, if Tisha B'Av falls on Erev Shabbat, it is permissible to launder on Thursday. That's not really the contemporary custom.
Besides, you can't fall on our Shabbat with contemporary.
Right. And then Erev Tisha B'Av lo yochal adam shnei kavshilin. You can't have 2 cooked dishes, which is very much the sign of a nice meal, which you have to have 2 at Pesach. Lo yochal basar velo yishteh yayin, and one does not eat meat and one does not drink wine. That has been continued for the entire 9 days. That it's a custom not to drink any kind of liquor, particular wine, nor eat meat, except for Shabbat itself. You still can do Kiddush over wine. You still could have a fleishik meal on Shabbat. And then there are a couple of other customs that they mention here. So that's just that there's so much more discussion of the Gemara on that Mishnah, but I just wanted to bring in what I think some of these fascinating comments of the rabbis are and reflect on how much they still speak to us today, sadly. Any questions, comments?
Interesting. Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay.
Thank you,
Well,
Rabbi.
some call
you.
and
Roll call.
stay cool today.
It's a little bit of Kohelet, Ein Chadash Tachat HaShamesh.
True. Unfortunately.
Indeed.
Yeah, and in fact, I'm not going to be able to find it now, but I did receive one of my notices that came on from my Israeli, I can't find it, but there was some concern about the relations between people in Israel. That was one of the headlines and one of the flashes from my Israeli news. So take care, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for
Thank
listening.
you.
Thank you.
Have an easy rest of the day, fast.
Mhm.